Hello everybody! Today we're going to take a detailed look back at our first 12 months operating Benton Guesthouse on beautiful Ōmishima Island. We are technically a part of Imabari City in Ehime Prefecture, but we are a little island in the middle of the Seto Sea. Now, our island is part of a series of suspension bridges called the Shimanami Kaido, and those bridges span all the way from Ehime Prefecture to Hiroshima Prefecture, so it's a popular tourist destination. Without any further delay, let's just jump right over to the blog. Chotto mate kudasai. Hold that thought for just 1 minute. Please let me make one thing clear, because this is the internet and I don't want any weird comments about this because it's related to finances. So just in case it's not obvious, this post is educational and therefore it's not for the purposes of bragging. When we get into the numbers, you'll see that I'm quite happy with the results of our first year, but this guesthouse income by itself would not be enough to live comfortably, especially once you consider all the other ongoing expenses necessary for living in and operating a business in Japan. We're working really hard for a 3-year visa at our next renewal, as opposed to our 2 one-year visa periods. And in order to achieve that, we need to demonstrate higher income in 2025. Much of that will come from honey sales, which is why our multifaceted business plan is essential. So while it's pretty cool that we will have a full return on our complete guesthouse investment within a pretty short time frame, not going to give you any spoilers, you got to watch the video to see. That's not to say that we don't still need to be very careful with expenses, as we are often spending as much as we make some months on other aspects of our business, and we have to make the most of our small remaining budget. So that's all. I just wanted to throw this in there. Please proceed. Feel free to follow the link in the video description over to the Benton Homestead website, where you can find the written version of this blog. Here you can see a picture of our guest house kitchen, and since it's a private full house rental, the kitchen is private for guests to use and they're welcome to cook their own meals. Well friends, time is flying by. It's hard to believe it's already been 1 year since we opened the doors of Benton Guesthouse on Ōmishima Island. We arrived in Japan 21 months ago and purchased this house 18 months ago, which at that time had been abandoned for 10 years. Now, it's been 12 months since we started welcoming guests from all over the world. I think this calls for a celebration and a close look at the first year of numbers and data. We decided at the beginning of this adventure to become an open book resource for others. After countless hours searching for information on the kinds of things we set out to achieve in Japan, it was clear there were very few success stories to read, and even fewer step-by-step guides. We started sharing our personal experience and almost immediately started getting overwhelmingly positive feedback. It's pretty clear that this kind of information is needed and appreciated. So while it takes a lot of time to create data-heavy content like this, I'm happy to do so. For this 1-year guesthouse financial update, I'll be referring heavily to my previous long-form blog titled Japan Data, Akiya to Airbnb, General Process and Total Expense. We'll see how the year compares to our initial forecast. We'll look at income, guest statistics, monthly expenses, additional renovation expenses, and put it all together for a revised time frame to recoup our whole investment. Before you dive into my data from the first year of operation, if you're not familiar with our story, you might want to start at the beginning. It's still hard for me to believe that we managed to complete renovation and licensure in 6 short months in order to stay on the startup visa schedule and achieve the business manager visa extension approval. But we did it. We poured our heart and soul into transforming an Akiya from a state of abandonment for over a decade into our cute little guest house. Before we get started, here are some preliminary thoughts. First of all, what is Benton Homestead? We're living in Japan with the business manager visa, which means that our residency is essentially tied to the success of our business, Benton Homestead. We are a Japanese Kabushiki Gaisha corporation. We initially received the startup visa based on our business plan, which includes Benton Guesthouse, honeybees, and natural farming. Our business development has evolved to welcome additional related demands, including to a small extent real estate consulting and YouTube. We're also working towards opening our retro shop and roadside farm stand, constructing a chicken paradise to welcome a feathered flock, and somehow trying to find a way to bring my portrait photography back into the mix here in Japan. I say all that only to illustrate that Benton Guesthouse is very much an essential piece of our business, but it's not our entire business. When did Benton Guesthouse open? After meeting all the license requirements, the listing for Benton Guesthouse was published on November 20th, 2023. We were delighted to receive our first booking within 6 hours of that listing going live, and we hosted our first guest just 4 days later. I never dreamed our first year of hosting in Japan would be so busy. I can't wait to get into these numbers. What sort of rental license does Benton Guesthouse have? We initially received the Minpaku rental license, then almost immediately decided to upgrade to the full Ryokan hotel license. So we have experience to compare and contrast both rental license processes. During the first year, how did guests find us? Most of our guests were travelers already accustomed to using the Airbnb platform, so they likely found our guest house from searching their listings. But we were pleasantly surprised that a total of 20 of our bookings came from people who follow our YouTube or follow our Instagram, and they booked their trip specifically to come see our house. That's so wild and so cool. I still sort of can't get over that. We take the time to greet each guest personally, but we made sure to set aside extra time to visit with the guests who were familiar with our story, and we often met them for dinner or visited quite a bit longer. We've made many new friends from all over the world. Speaking of all over the world, where did our guests travel from? The list of countries so far is Germany, France, China, Switzerland, Denmark, Italy, Spain, the UK, Australia, New Zealand, Czech Republic, Poland, the Netherlands, Norway, Turkey, Singapore, Canada, Mexico, United States, and of course, Japan. Over the course of 12 months, we had 80 total bookings. So that means 20 found us from YouTube and 60 found us from other means. Of those 80 bookings, 68 groups were inbound travelers or foreigners with Japanese residency, and 12 of those groups were domestic travelers, Japanese guests. We had 169 total guests, and of those, 84 were cycling, 77 were driving, and 8 of them were taking the bus, taking the ferry, or walking. The average booking was for 2 guests, but we also did receive some bookings of 1 guest, which is exactly why we built our price based on a sliding scale per number of guests, so we would be reasonably affordable for anywhere from 1 to 6 guests. So of course our maximum was 6 guests, that's the current maximum, and we got quite a few 6 guest bookings. And next year, after we add a second bathroom, we'll be increasing our size to 10 maximum guests. A 1-night stay was by far the most common stay. 3-night stays were the second most common, 2-night stays were the third most common, and 4-night stays were a little rare, but those were the longest. Now, this is the information that everybody really wants to see, so let's get right into the guest house income for our first year. These numbers cover from when we opened, November 20th, 2023, which is basically December 2023, to November 2024. So we're looking at those 12 months. Airbnb income was a total of $17,750 US, and at the time that this blog was written, with the exchange rate, that is equal to 2,665,000 Japanese yen. Now, we did have a little tiny extra income, but we're not going to be considering that. Obviously, I have to keep track of everything and break it down into categories for our accountant. And guests did purchase some things from our little guest house convenience store and our little mini version of the retro shop, but we're not taking that into consideration for this video. So we're just going to go with our total income for the first year of operation is $17,750. Let's take a look at each month over the course of the year. Looking back at our financial goals, we set out to earn $2,000 or approximately 300,000 Japanese yen per month. That figure was determined by our base rate of $135 or 20,000 yen per night, with a goal of 15 booked nights per month. If we had achieved that goal for 12 consecutive months, starting on the day we opened, our income would have been $23,950. So our first year's income of $17,750 did not quite reach that amount, with a difference of $6,450. However, all in all, I think our projection was pretty accurate. 4 months out of the year, we exceeded our goal, and 2 months came pretty close to meeting our goal. This pink bar graph is provided to us by Airbnb. This is our monthly earnings report, and they only show it to you per calendar year. So what you're looking at here is each month of 2024. And in this graph, you can see that our best month was October, where we made $2,535 or about 380,000 yen. We were quite surprised that our second best month was August, the notoriously most humid month of the year, where we made $2,355. And again, both of those are the 2 months that exceeded our business plan goal for the guest house. As expected, our slowest month was February, and that's the only month that temperatures in this area almost reach freezing. That month we made $225. We had one booking. Actually, all 4 of our first 4 months operating, November, December, January, and February, were all very slow, each with only 1 or 2 bookings. But by the time March rolled around, we were really off to the races. You can look at the bar graph there, and you can see how we just slowly made it up to our goal and then started going over the goal from there with a little dip in September. I believe there were 3 main contributing factors to our slower start. First of all, we opened at the very beginning of winter weather, which is a slow time for tourism in our area. There are still visitors and cyclists in November, December, and January, but the numbers drop off significantly. Also, of course, new rental listings with only a few reviews are generally slower to get bookings because they haven't yet built a certain level of trustworthiness. And third, we chose the Airbnb platform, primarily because that's what we used previously, and we were always happy with the service and functionality. However, Airbnb is still relatively new in Japan, so it's not the most popular travel site with domestic travelers. Now let's pop over to expenses, and this is going to cover the same amount of time, November 2023 to November 2024. So here are my expenses broken down into a few categories. The first is monthly expenses. This is utility bills. We spent a total of $1,650 or about 247,000 yen, and that's an average of $138 a month. I broke that down further. You can see there electric was $620 for the year, internet was $490 for the year, water was $245 for the year, gas was $155 for the year, and that just covers the monthly rent for the gas tank that's sitting outside our house and a little bit of gas that was used to power the oven in the kitchen. Then we also have kerosene, which is a separate tank that heats up our water for the shower and the kitchen sink, as well as we have some kerosene heaters. And that was $135 for the year. So total utilities running the guest house for the whole year was $1,650. Right now we only have one annual expense, which is $75 for the annual property tax, and we have $150 in recurring expenses. I didn't really know what to call this section, but this just covers refills for complimentary guest items, coffee, tea, kitchen essentials like salt, pepper, hot sauce, that sort of thing. Toiletries like, of course, toilet paper, shampoo, conditioner, and stuff for the shower. and cleaning supplies to clean between guests. This year we had a one-time expense that we won't have again. This was $225 for the one-time property acquisition tax. This tax bill comes due 1 year after the purchase of a property, so we paid this during the course of our first operational year. And if you click the link in the blog, I do have a whole video on the property acquisition tax. One somewhat hefty cost was the one-time cost of the Ryokan hotel license upgrade. I mentioned earlier that after receiving our Minpaku rental license last year, we pretty much immediately started working towards the more robust and less restrictive Ryokan hotel license. If we had gone straight for this license, it would have saved us a lot of time and energy, but we didn't, and now we have the experience of both to compare and contrast, which I do believe is actually beneficial. So the total for upgrading to the Ryokan hotel license was $2,400, and that's broken down into $1,550 for the judicial scrivener who completed the application process on our behalf, $750 for the architectural assessment, which actually had a team of architects come out and they made this great little packet of information for us, and $100 for the equipment required for the license upgrade, and that include a security camera and a lockbox. Over the course of the year, we also spent $1,500 on additional guest house improvements. This mostly includes summer updates, getting ready for the heat and humidity of the Japanese summer. We had 2 heating and air conditioning units installed, a front door mosquito screen, a really nice heavy-duty screen that opens and closes, cedar platforms for all bedding storage, and a portable air conditioner. So all in all, the total expenses for the first year of operation come to $6,000. Now, a year ago, when I was planning for this, I thought that our monthly and recurring expenses would be a little higher. So I am pleased with the average monthly utility cost. Our top priority, of course, is guest comfort, because happy guests lead to happy reviews, which leads to superhost status and more guests. During the hot and cold months, I would encourage guests to use the heating and cooling to their level of comfort. Don't hold back. Make sure you're comfortable. But even so, it did not make the utility bills go through the roof, which I was a little worried about. With the additional 2 new heating and air conditioning units we plan to install next year, monthly costs might even decrease a little bit due to the higher efficiency of new units. Okay, data summary. In this section, I took the time to crunch the numbers and sort of put everything together. So it's a little bit of a stream of consciousness here, but I'm going to go through it with you, and I hope it's not too confusing. I tried to lay it out as clearly as I could. Now that we have our first year of data, how long do we estimate it will take to recoup our full investment? The short answer is about 3 years. Now, I mentioned briefly, or maybe I haven't mentioned yet, but initially I thought it would be 2 years, but now that we have the monthly information and a whole year of data to go off, the short answer is about 3 years. Our initial investment was $38,000. That included the purchase of the house, renovation, licenses, and furnishing. Last year, we spent an additional $6,000, which brings the current running total at the end of 2024 to a $44,000 investment. Looking forward to 2025, we can expect to spend about $2,000 on monthly utilities, property tax, and recurring expenses. Then in 2026, we can also expect to spend about the same $2,000. So that brings the anticipated running total at the end of 2026 to approximately $48,000. That's the number that we're trying to reach. If we anticipate that our annual earnings will stay exactly the same next year at $17,750, then we would break even around 2 years and 9 months. But we do expect income to increase, so let's try to get a little bit more accurate. If we estimate that income will increase next year due to our consistently high reviews and adding additional booking platforms, we're considering VRBO and Booking, we could potentially anticipate increasing to 25,000 income, let's say. With that estimate, we would break even around 2 years and 3 months. However, we do have some additional renovations planned, which of course will delay the break-even date. We've been planning phase 2 renovations from the beginning, which means more expenses. To increase guest comfort, we'll repair the bathtub for an added amenity and a few cosmetic bathroom touch-ups. We are well aware that the bathroom is sort of a sticking point for the guest house, and improving that would be our highest priority. To increase bookings and increase guest capacity, we'll also have 2 additional heating and air conditioning units installed and renovate one small unused room into a second toilet room. Both of these things should increase income, therefore sort of bolstering the argument that we could increase our income to approximately 25,000 next year. We don't have an exact dollar amount for phase 2 renovations yet. We've been working closely with our business consultant and the local city office to prepare our application for a business subsidy, which helps cover the cost of new established business expansion projects. If we end up receiving this subsidy, that would be amazing and would allow us to complete Benton Guesthouse improvements much quicker than anticipated, despite our limited budget. With or without the subsidy, we're looking at somewhere in the ballpark of $5,000 to $15,000 of additional expenses renovating the guest house. So adding that to the list, that brings the anticipated running total at the end of 2026 with phase 2 renovations to approximately 53,000 to 63,000 US dollars. Based on our first year data, I believe the goal of earning an average of 300,000 yen or 2,000 US dollars a month can absolutely be achieved. That would be 15 nights booked at our average price of 20,000 yen or $130 per night. Some stays will have additional guests, which, as you know, we have a sliding scale of costs, so each guest adds a little bit to the income. It increases the nightly rate, which means fewer booked nights can still reach our goal. For example, a reservation for groups of 10 would be 60,000 yen. If we had 5 groups of 10, 5 nights with a group of 10 each month, we would meet our goal. And that sounds like a lot of people, but with the location that we're in with all these cycling trips, I do think that that is somewhat feasible. All of that being said, I know that was a long stream of consciousness, but that being said, it's very possible that our initial investment of $38,000 will be returned by the end of year 2. That would be amazing because my initial forecast was to break even with 2 years. Our updated estimate, everything we went over, to recoup the initial investment plus all upcoming expenses is by the end of year 3. Now, I'm pretty new to this kind of business. I've been a self-employed photographer for a very long time, but I'm not, doing this kind of business forecasting and all of this planning is sort of new to me, but it sure seems to me like recouping your investment within 3 years for something that's going to continue to generate an income is pretty good. So, I might just take 1 second here and toot my own horn a little bit. Let me know what you think. Does that seem like a good investment? Now I'm going to jump into some additional questions. Before I sat down to write this blog, I put it out there on social media if there were any specific questions that you guys had, and you asked some really great questions. I'm actually glad that I did that because it gave me an opportunity to write about some areas that I think are interesting, but that I wouldn't have necessarily known that you all would have thought was interesting. So let's get into some questions. The first is, how does this first year in Japan compare to our Airbnb in New Orleans, Louisiana? Of course, comparing 2 very different rentals in 2 very different countries is difficult. But just for fun, we can look at how the first year of Benton Guesthouse compares to our previous Airbnb, which was also a large private unit with no shared indoor spaces. Our home in New Orleans was a duplex situated on our little urban farm oasis in the lower Ninth Ward. The neighborhood was less than ideal in many ways, but it was just a 10-minute drive from the French Quarter, which is one of the most popular tourist neighborhoods in New Orleans. We were one of the only rentals in the city that allowed pets without a major deposit or extra cleaning fee, and of course, we offered a fully fenced quarter-acre backyard equipped with chickens, gardens, and all kinds of things for guests' dogs to sniff. Because of this, we catered to guests traveling with pets, and almost every single booking brought at least one dog. In this graphic here, provided by Airbnb, we're looking at years. Each of those graphs represents 1 year. From 2017 to 2021, those numbers you're seeing are the New Orleans rental income. You can see the bookings really took a couple of years to build up momentum, and you can also see there that our first year of Benton Guesthouse, 2024, is just shy. It's nearly the same amount of income as our best year number 5 in New Orleans. Any cultural or demographic differences between running an Airbnb in Japan versus New Orleans? Yes, ma'am. In New Orleans, almost all of our guests were American. I mentioned previously that almost every booking brought dogs. Long distance traveling in the US with public transportation is super rare, especially with pets, so almost every single booking arrived by car. That's right there is a big difference already. Most guests were coming to New Orleans to have a good time, so they would leave early to explore the city and come home very late. Sometimes they would hire us to dog sit, which was an added bonus. Almost all dogs were very well behaved, and we only had a few instances of some nervous doggy damage digging at the door frame. I wish we could host dogs here in Japan, but the tatami flooring throughout the house is just too easily damaged. One thing we don't have to worry about in Japan, like we did in New Orleans, was the potential for people to rent our place for a party. We didn't allow any extra guests besides the number of guests booked on the reservation, but some people still tried to skirt around it, even though we literally just lived on the other side of the wall. Anytime a booking came in and the guest was a resident of New Orleans or Louisiana, that right there was already a red flag, because why did they need to rent a place in the city that they already lived? We got a few wild groups trying to start parties that we actually had to knock on the door and shut down like a couple of big party poopers. The residents of our neighborhood actually did have a lot of parties in general: block parties, second line parades, birthday parties with bouncy houses and DJs. New Orleans is just a loud and boisterous and fun place. But this was our home, and I didn't want to deal with any party aftermath. Another thing we don't have to worry about in Japan is theft. A fair number of our New Orleans guests were actually moving cross country with large moving vans or trucks with trailers. This made me extra nervous because our neighborhood had a lot of potential for crime. We had cameras installed around the property, including the driveway, but fortunately, it never became an issue for guests. Now, here in the Japanese countryside, we don't even lock our doors, and I'm not at all worried about filling the guest house with antiques. Even though guests come from all over the world, almost all of them have been very polite and respectful of our home, furnishings, and time, so it really doesn't seem like a concern. What are your thoughts on Airbnb versus other rental platforms? I mentioned earlier that we chose Airbnb because it's the platform that we're personally most familiar with. Since we've been living in Japan, and especially during the 6 month time of the startup visa, it seemed like every single thing we did, every single day, we were learning something new. We were doing something we'd never done before. So when it came to creating the guest house listing, I wanted something that I was already familiar with. I wanted just something to be familiar and not have to be a whole new learning experience. But also, Airbnb has pretty great customer service, and I sense that the popularity will continue to increase in Japan. We only just recently added Benton Guesthouse to 2 additional platforms: VRBO. I'm actually not sure if you're supposed to say it VRBO or Verbo, and Booking. The listings only went live a few weeks ago, and we only have 1 booking from each platform so far. I'm testing the waters and going through the learning curve to learn how both new platforms operate, how they handle guest communication, and all the details that are different from Airbnb. I will admit that I want to encourage guests to use Airbnb for my own preference, so our rates are a little bit higher on the other platforms, but they stay the same on Airbnb. Honestly, I was hesitant to add other platforms, mostly because of my own fear of getting a double booking. But after talking with a few other people who host on multiple sites, they assured me that the calendar syncing is actually pretty reliable, and it does seem to be that way. However, I have already had one calendar syncing issue, and I just started. Our very first reservation with VRBO was for a date that my Airbnb calendar was marked as checkout only because we would be in Tokyo. Now, checkout only means that I didn't block the date off completely because if a guest wanted to check out prior to that day and then stay during the time that we were gone, that would have been totally fine. We just weren't going to be home to handle the check in procedure. So on Airbnb, they have the ability to mark a date check out only, and that did not sync with the VRBO calendar because they don't offer that functionality. So apparently, the calendar only works for reservations that are fully blocked dates, not partially blocked dates. Fortunately, the VRBO guest was not upset. We messaged about this, and they actually said they will try to stay at our guest house another time because the reason they booked us in the first place is that their friend recommended us so highly. As a side note, I've been working to grow our reviews on Google Maps as well. Even though you can't book directly from Google Maps, we've gotten a handful of phone calls from Japanese travelers who found our listing by searching the map, and believe it or not, they seem fairly accustomed to booking over the phone instead of using any sort of website. Japan can be a little old school in that regard, which is cool, but I'm always just sort of a little taken aback. And of course, thankfully, Evan can speak Japanese and sort of direct them to one of the platforms to complete the booking. How did you feel about the vacancy and turnover rate? My general consensus is that I'm really happy with our first year numbers. I'm really, really happy with this first 12 months. The only aspect I'd like to improve is to encourage guests to stay for more than one night. Cleaning a guest house by myself is a lot of work, especially when bookings are back to back one night stays. That means I'm cleaning the house every day. Some weeks we had 4 or 5 nights in a row of one night turnarounds. But maybe even more of a concern than my own workload is the guest enjoyment factor of only staying one night. I can't tell you how many times guests would express a desire to stay just one more night to explore the islands. And we even had a few guests who said, well, this is their second trip to the Shimanami Kaido bridge network. They've ridden it before, but they didn't give themselves enough time the first time around, so they had to come back for a second trip to really enjoy it. Cyclists who ride the bridge network, they depart from either Onamichi or Imabari, and they're often chasing the sunset to reach Ōmishima Island, which is in the middle of their journey. They've rode all day, they check in, they walk to dinner, relax in the guest house, then they get up in the morning and they ride the second half the next day, which is just as long. A schedule like that might be a lot of fun, and there's sure to be some beautiful sights, and I'm sure experienced cyclists can do it a lot faster than non-experienced cyclists, so maybe they have a little bit of time, but it seems to me like it doesn't leave much time to enjoy all the little delights that the islands have to offer. Each island is sort of unique, and part of the charm is visiting the shrines, meandering the shop-lined streets, popping into one of any number of family-run businesses, finding that perfect restaurant that only has 3 tables, picking up some local art, that sort of thing. So next year, I hope to work more closely with some of the local tourism groups to encourage cyclists to take 2, 3, or 4 nights to leisurely ride from one end of the Shimanami Kaido to the other. And maybe that means staying one night on different islands. Maybe it still means only staying one night at our guest house because they've stayed 1 or 2 nights in other places. Or maybe it means staying here on Ōmishima and using it sort of as a base of exploration. But I would like to encourage guests to stay more time, whether or not it's at our guest house. I just think that they would get more enjoyment out of what the islands have to offer. Well, that ran a little long, but I really enjoy these detailed data blogs and videos. They're nice for me because I'm not very good at speaking off the cuff, so this way I can write out all my thoughts ahead of time. Also, these are some of our most popular videos. Looking at our YouTube analytics, the two most data heavy videos, the one we made covering the Akia to Airbnb process and the one covering the startup visa to business manager visa process, those two are consistently watched by new viewers every single week, even though they were published a year ago. So it really makes me feel like the effort that I put into making these data videos is being appreciated. In conclusion, I hope this answered some of your questions and was perhaps also mildly entertaining. Please feel free to continue the dialogue and questions in the video comments below. I'm more than happy to answer your questions, or if I don't know the answer, I can refer you to someone who can help. I've said this over and over, but I'll say it again. Moving to Japan, living in Japan, purchasing property in Japan, operating a business in Japan without working for a major Japanese employer or being married to a Japanese spouse, these things are complicated. It's complicated, but it is not impossible. Thanks again for watching. We're looking forward to a very exciting year 2, and we'll see you in the next video. All right, one more thing at the end here. I just want to give a real quick shout out to the illustrator who made this super cool shirt and the cool NoFX punk rock band shirt earlier in the video. I just got them in the mail, and the reason I wore them is because I love them. And I've never actually met the illustrator before, but we meet a lot of really cool people on this adventure. And one of those really cool people is someone that we've been working with our real estate consulting. We're helping him find an Akia for him to renovate, and he also happens to be good longtime friends with the band NoFX, who has been one of my favorite bands since back in 1998, the first time I saw them. And they just had their final 40-year ending as a band worldwide tour. One of their stops was here in Japan that was close enough for us to go to, and it happened to be the day before my 40th birthday. They were having their 40th anniversary. We are retiring tour. So it just was kind of like this really cool coincidence, and I tried to get tickets, but they were playing with a super duper popular Japanese punk rock band called High Standard, and the tickets sold out like pretty much immediately. So, long story short, this guy, this cool guy that we're working with for the real estate consulting, he got us on the guest list for the Osaka stop of the NoFX final tour. And while we were there, we picked up some merch, and the cool NoFX final tour shirt was sold out at the show. And I just happened to mention that in conversation to our client and now friend, and he said, "Oh, let me just message the illustrator." Like, okay, he just knows who made the shirt. And the illustrator, again, who I've never met, he wrote and said, "Yeah, we've got some extra ones now that the tour is over. I'm going to send you one." And then he also sent this cool bonus shirt for no reason. I don't know him. I don't know what I did to deserve this super cool gift, but in addition to the NoFX shirt, he sent this Nagoya Antique Market illustration shirt and a couple of his stickers. So if you like punk rock, you've probably seen his illustration on various musician band t-shirts, flyers, tours, that sort of thing. You've almost certainly seen his illustrations, and it turns out he's just a super nice and generous guy as well. So thank you so much. I'll put the link to his website and his Instagram down below. He obviously does really cool illustration and design work, so go check him out. And just sending a super thank you to both of those guys who made this happen for, I don't know why, but it's awesome. So thanks.